there are, every year, this thing gets easier for me and harder for everyone else because there's more people, there's more this, more that. And we'll have a real thank you at the end of Saturday. But I want to thank all of you for coming. It says the attendees. I'm going to make a request at the end of my little presentation about what I want of you. So far, we've asked nothing of you except that you come and eat and enjoy the thing. The two call-outs are that, little call-outs for now, but more for later, I guess, is that the amount of work that Carissa did this year was more than ever. You know, so when I say it's easier for me, it's easier because the number of people who say, no, I can't come is substantial. And so they get into a little folder called next year. So we're almost done for next year. It's great. I don't know what it'll be about, but we're almost there. But the work, the organization, that Carissa and a bunch of people working tirelessly and for free, mostly, is really extraordinary. I'll have a slide about Rick Guidotti. I didn't realize I had a slide, and I'll put that up in a moment, okay? So I'm going to talk about evolution and what I think holds this together. And you could call it a deranged brain if you want, okay? This is the slide about Rick. Rick is a friend who spoke a couple years ago. Emily and I saw Rick again with our friend Pat Furlong in Rome. And last night, when Rick saw Emily, he said, with an extraordinary theater, he said, "Oh, we haven't seen each other since Rome," he said. Come on, Rick. So Rick, where are you? I want you to stand up for 1 second. So Rick is here, and Rick will be taking lots of pictures and stuff, and he's an important guy in our lives, and I'm hoping he'll come all the time from now on. It's good to have him back. Okay, so a little quickie talk of. I actually have something to say for the first time that is worth remembering, I claim, and you will be the judge of that. Every year I show this slide, and in fact, this is Tom Check's favorite slide. He's not here this year, he's on someplace far away, and he just loves this slide, and forgives the fact that I drew it by hand, and last year I made some jokes about, I'm down at the bottom here somewhere, and I thought it was funny, and none of you did. So I've updated this slide so you can understand what this is about, which is about healthcare, which is that we've had some events. Those are my events. And I put this up here as a warning that if any of you are grateful and over-hug me, I will punch you. Because that event at the right just happened in one of these moments where you feel like an asshole. And it turns out you're right. But I am getting better, and I thank you for your kind notes. But remember, no hugs. Okay, so this is now science, evolution, in a way that is meant to teach everyone in this room something you don't know, including the biologists in this room who I've actually tried to teach this to for the 10 years I've been thinking about it. And people go, it's not so important. I don't know if it's important or not, but it is the way I think about you and me as humans in the context of biology and Darwinian evolution. So we all learned a long time ago that, there's this thing called replication and ruggedness. Clearly a creature coming out of the ooze that replicates and is not rugged goes away and is lost. You all know that. And so you need both things. And the Darwinian breakout, which I'll tell you about, was, genetics, DNA, some RNA. It depends on what world you think it was. It doesn't really matter. And I want to talk about the difference between, in evolutionary terms, the difference between bacteria, which you all think are not interesting compared to us, and us, who I think are not interesting compared to bacteria. And I'm going to teach you that. So my primary goal is to make you wish to be a bacterium. I'm going to fail at that. So the single most important paper, I think, post-Darwin, about evolution was written 25 years ago by Francois Jacob, and you'll note it says who just died, because I have some sad stuff at the end of this talk about death to be then countered in another day by Daniel Klein telling us how funny it is to die. So I'm not sure that's true, but he is funny, and it'll be interesting, okay? So Jacob wrote this article that touched all of my science friends about how Darwinian evolution cannot be perfect, about how essentially Darwinian evolution is kinetic rather than something that's at equilibrium, if you will, if you want to put it in those terms. And every once in a while, something happens in evolution, and it gets kind of frozen, and it's just a kind of accident along the way, but you don't get to back up very well, he said, without making the argument I'm going to teach you. And so he asserted in this wonderful paper, I think, which we all read and argued about, seems right to me still, I still read it every once in a while, that if you freeze something, you're going to go down a suboptimal path and you'll end up at a non-global optimum, but at some other kind of optimum. And so these suboptimal solutions I call clunky. Okay? And I'm going to show you what I mean by clunky. And I'm going to argue, so that all of you understand it forever, that it's humans that are clunky, not bacteria. Bacteria are not clunky. They've reached their optima, and I'm going to show you why and what that means. And I'm going to try to tell you that as I'm getting older, that this sociology stuff, this political stuff, is looming more and more importantly in trying to transform healthcare, because no matter what drugs you have or whatever else you do, if you remain as dumb as we are, you will not capture the value of that. That's going to be the assertion. And then we'll see if there's a solution. So my friend Carl Woese just died, another mention of death. And he deserved a Nobel Prize, but he died before he got one. If he had lived another 100 years, he never would have gotten one, but he died thinking it was going to be next year. And he made this diagram. This is a very early diagram that is really an important thing that he did. This came from him, not from a group of people, not from Watson and Crick, but actually from him, Carl Woese. He figured this all out from his brain, that there were three kingdoms. The thing on the left with a little circle, that's the left, with the yellow thing, humans are sort of up there. And I put a note in case you're forgetting the point here, the non-optimized humans, right? We have to define that, but we're not optimized. And I'm going to tell you what that means in a second. And on the right, you have these two different kinds of things that are largely single cells most of the time, and I label them as optimized. And so I want to teach you what that means because it's kind of remarkable. So if you were to stay in the kind of pseudoscience language I try to use, you would say that over there on the left, the humans, we're kind of on some kinetic path, and we're clunky, and we're this and we're that, just to keep the language going. And over on the right, we've somehow been equilibrated over time. They have been, not we. And so you hold in your bowels a lot of guys that are more highly evolved than you. You have to remember that. Every time you flush one away, you think, oh my God. You know, people who worry about stepping on an ant, it's flushing that is a bad thing for the planet. So this is the argument, and you can understand this argument. I know there are a lot of non-scientists in this room, smart people. So remember, I've sent notes to all the speakers. Do not jargonize this thing. And if you do, if you feel you're being jargonized, you don't have to raise your hand. You say, huh? You can either do that. Huh? Okay? Be obnoxious. It's our show. Let's take it seriously. And they've all been asked to be aware that some 100 of you in the room are not jargon people, okay? What's on this slide you can learn and know it forever. And it's the heart of what I'm trying to say. It is the absolute heart. And it's something that I've showed lots of scientists in this very room who've told me they don't give a shit what I think about this. They don't care at all because they don't think it means anything. I don't know if it means anything or not. I think it's incredibly important, okay? So I'm going to contrast the bacteria with us. That's the contrast I'm going to make to try to understand who's optimized and who isn't. And this calculation that's on this thing, I have made 1,800 times over the last 10 years, and I've called my friends that do biostatistics and blah, 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 and they all get to the same place. You can do it in the back of an envelope in about 9 minutes. It's so easy. So bacteria, what about bacteria? Well, it turns out that they've been around a few billion years. That's a number. And it takes them about an hour to replicate. So we don't know if it took them an hour 3 billion years ago. I'm not going to argue with you. Okay, I don't know. Nobody knows. But today, on the average, about an hour. And they have one mutation for every million base pairs every time, more or less, every time they divide. So you do the math. You think an hour, you take 3 billion years, you do that math. You say, holy moly. Each bacterial species in its 3 billion years, since Darwinian became, itself, has had 10 to the 8th, 100 million mutations per base pair in its genome. That's a number you're not going to want to remember. I'm going to give you an easier number to remember. That's a big number. Every letter of the DNA of every bacterial species on this earth and in your little insides has had 100 million changes in every letter. So you can do this yourself, you sciencey guys, and you'll come to the same conclusion, and you might be off different by me by a factor of 10, and then you'll have an argument about, you can have a lot of arguments. You can say, well, what were they doing 3 billion years ago? It doesn't matter. We're just talking, right? So, how about humans? Well, there was a creature about 4 million years ago, thought to be, I'm going to show you his picture. He's a cute little guy, small, picture of an artist's rendition, kind of. And so it's been about 4 million years, so that's not 3 billion, it's 4 million. And we know the present mutation rate in humans. It's one change in 10 to the 9th letters per long replication time. And you do that math, and you come to this astonishing conclusion. That unlike the 100 million changes in every letter of every bacterial genome, the number for humans is 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000. We actually named them. They're called the SNPs, more or less. I look at Charlie because the chance that Charlie will agree with any of this is small, and the chance that he'll raise his hand and say, you're wrong, is high, but it's okay. He's a guest, and he's my friend. I don't care. But if you put these two numbers together, in simple English it says, the vastly earlier speciation, the more frequent replications, the higher mutation rates, have allowed the bacteria to be more hammered at their DNA level by a factor of 1 trillion. Okay? So that's the difference between being selected and being a stochastic process with a lot of noise. So you have to think of it that way. That's the way I think of it. So here's a picture of this guy, Artie. I don't know whether this one's a guy or not a guy, but he's a thing, an artist rendition. He's a little guy. He's about this big. And when this guy from Berkeley found the bones of lots of these things, they kept it as a big secret, and they eventually, this group of people devoted an entire issue of science to this thing. And he was little, he was 2 feet tall instead of 6 feet. And this happened about 4 million years ago. And so that number 4 million that I used came from this work. And when I told this to a physicist friend, not needing to think that we're the optimized creatures on this earth, which we are not, he said, we're version 1.0. So that's important. It means that when we're thinking about fixing whatever we're trying to fix, biologically or sociologically, as this slide might show. No, it doesn't, because I don't remember what that slide was. Let me look and see. Oh, yeah, it's a different slide. Well, anyway, I would get there. So 1.0. So you want to remember two numbers. 1.0 for us and 1 trillion for how much more hammered a bacterial genome is than ours. And you can all remember that because those are two easy numbers, 1.0 and 1 trillion. Duh. Okay? So I've now taught you non-jargon guys that somehow we are 1.0. I'm just going to keep repeating myself until my time is up. So we're clunky. And the reason we're clunky is we haven't had time to get optimized. That's the argument. It's a simple argument. Okay? So I want to make this in a picture so that you never forget it, okay? I mean, you're never going to forget it because you're nice. So I've always used these, I've used these pictures about 1,000,000 times. So there was this guy that drew funny things, and I used to love them, and he's been memorialized on a United States postage stamp. So Rube Goldberg dead, of course. And when I was growing up, I used to see, so long, when I was growing up, I used to see these drawings, and I was fascinated by them. They're so funny, and to me. And so I want to show you one so that you get a representation of what I mean by clunky and non-optimized. So this is the same story, but with a picture. So this is one of probably 1,000 Rube Goldberg drawings, I think. I don't know. One of 3. I don't know if they're the same number for a guy like me. So this one was, I just did something bad, Mary, by itching. I don't know if it's still working. Is it okay? I hope so. So this was his drawing, Rube Goldberg's drawing, as a metaphor for human biology and sociology, politics, whatever you want to think about, a self-opening umbrella. And it's one of many that I've looked at. It's one of my favorites, but not the favorite. And it starts over here. The idea is to open that umbrella when it rains. So you want to get from A to over here. Just a picture that he drew. And this guy's wearing this set of things, these clunky things, and that thing right there, remember, Rube Goldberg. It wasn't Rube Finnegan, it was Rube Goldberg. So it starts with a dried prune, which I was fed often as a young boy to help those same bowels we talked about earlier. Okay, so a little revealing, but not too bad for me. So it rains on a dried prune, and the idea of this Rube Goldberg clunky thing is that it swells, it makes this little thing go up, and when that goes up, this little lever, this comes down, and it goes across this thing, and it's a lighter, and all of a sudden, the lighter is a little flame, and it's pushed a little bit this way, and it lights the candle heats the kettle boils the water, the steam blows the whistle, at which point, there's no connection. Uh-oh, big deal. But the whistle sound scares the monkey who jumps on that thing, swings it back and forth, cuts that thing, balloon goes up, opens up the bird cage, gotta have bird cage, the birds fly out and they're all tied to the umbrella, a self-opening umbrella. It's clunky, but it works. It's kind of version 1.0. If you were designing a self-opening umbrella, it's kind of cute, beautiful, and clunky. And so the real issue for us when we think about healthcare is how much do we know about human biology if we're about to try to fix something, sociologically or medically? That's the question. And so to continue in this metaphor, this picture that I love so much, I ask you as a group, if somebody showed you that, how many of you would say, it's a monkey? And the answer, of course, none of you. You wouldn't say it's a monkey. You'd say it's a spot in a picture, and I have no idea what's in that thing. So with 95% knowledge, you can't guess the monkey. And at 5%, you can't guess anything. You can't even get the dried prune. You get rain and an umbrella. Duh, and nothing in between. And we don't understand human biology at the 5% level. We're just starting. We can know the genome, but that's not the same as knowing human biology. So this is a tough problem, and that's the end of that. Here's a summary. I had 2 summary slides. They're both stupid. Biology and the other one, sociology. And it says, gee, we're version 1.0, and how can we go forward in fixing healthcare if we can't understand the creature we're trying to keep healthy? That's a problem. I mean, you have to do it in some way that jumps through that, in some way that's empirical, gotta be. And that's, of course, what technology does. It doesn't say we gotta understand human biology. It says I gotta get a drug that treats this disease or whatever. That's an approach to that sort of thing. And of course, the problem for sociology is even worse, because the sociology experiments have been going on a shorter time, and they've been going on in a way that is barely Darwinian. It's something else. The ways that you could have a frozen accident. I assert that the Queen of England is a frozen accident. Sorry. But I think of her that way. And she's not frozen yet, but soon she will be in some version or another. And so that's kind of what we're talking about is how do you deal with a creature that's on a kinetic path, us, and not at equilibrium, if that's the right word, so that we can think about it. And so this is that same picture, and you got to wonder about it. And of course, the way you get there, and what this symposium is meant to be about for me in my brain, in my warped brain, is that somehow you use on the side of biology over there on the left, you kind of use modern omics. That's why every year we've had some omics. We've had some proteomics and some genomics and some omics, because that's a way to use data and correlations to move forward without actually full knowledge. That's the way I see it anyway. I mean, every once in a while you get lucky. SomaLogic got lucky this week with a group of people from Harvard, and there's an unbelievably lucky experiment that is so beautiful that if you're not really smart, you would think it's going to happen over and over and over and over. It's not going to happen over and over. It's going to happen every once in a while because it's hard to get lucky in science. And then that sociology stuff is even harder. So, and I want to remind you that I've shown you this picture before, genomics is risk, this is about omics, proteomics is health status. These two guys in circles have more or less the same DNA, except for Jim Watson's prostate cancer, which is probably noisy with all kinds of mutations. But, genomics is risk, proteomics is status, and you don't need to see that. This is my thing to remind you. As an aside, I have to give full credit. It came from Jacqueline Jacobson sent me this. We were talking about this morning at breakfast. 5% of the people in this room do not know who their father was. What? You do not know. You think you know. I'd like to, because I said it quietly on purpose. I said that 5% of you in this room do not know who your father is, and I'm talking about those of you who had breakfast this morning with your father. And so forensics is changing the game. I made up the number 5%. It's an anecdote. Could be wrong. Could be higher. Could be lower. I don't know. It's a number. All right. So I've been thinking a lot about the third symposium, the third evolution, the evolution of these symposia. I have 4 minutes to go, and some sadness for you, and some more humor maybe. So it's been wonderful for me. I mean, to me, this was a learning experience. These first four, we'll know about the learning in this one by Sunday, not yet, but I'm pretty excited. And I've been thinking about the way I'd like it to evolve, because we have enough resources to do this for a long time. Probably longer than I would have to do it, but we'll figure out a way to keep it going if it's worth doing. And I'd like it to turn into something, because I've actually made a slide. I would like it to turn into something. It could turn into a book club. Well, that's okay. That's kind of not, you spent $111,000 a year for 4 years to form a book club. You could have done it with a website in 14 seconds for $1.80, right? Well, but I'd like to do that. And, we could call it GLS so I don't get embarrassed every time I hear the word. So last year, not this year, but last year, I read the book that caused me to get Danny Klein to come, and you're going to get to hear him. The title of his talk is an outrageous title. He gave it. I didn't make it. He did it. And you have to read his book. You'd be a lunatic not to. That's kind of a circular argument. You'd be a lunatic to not read a book by a lunatic, I'd like to say, with great warmth is what I mean to say. And this year, I reread the Howard Gardner book, The Mind's New Science, which is worth reading. It's 25 years old, kind of about how linguistics and lots of other things help you understand human biology. Kind of an interesting perspective. It's a great, great book from this Harvard professor who still writes other books. And all of us at work have read this year Pursuing the Triple Aim at David Lawrence's suggestion, and I reread it for this symposium, actually carefully. That is to say, I read every sentence instead of not. And it is a wonderful piece of work to think about how the healthcare systems are changing, even as we're wondering how to make them change. There are people that are doing really good things. And so, so there's a book club. It's a small book club. It's got 3 books, but here's my real thought, which is how do you give us as a group a mission? We don't have a mission. We get together. How about a mission? I'd like us to have a mission. I think missions are good. And we could try to make a difference if we could think about how, because we got 400 people. I don't know how many, 400 people here today, or will be. As soon as I get done, they'll all come in. And we've got a lot of speakers, and they come back every year. Many of them do. And so it says here that we ought to do something with this, this nucleation, if you will, of thoughtful people who are interested in the same thing. And Robert Duke, who many of you heard a couple years ago, who gave a stunning talk, the most stunning graph that we've all used since then is the graph of your retention of knowledge during the semester when there's a peak that goes up. That's called the midterm. And then over here, there's a peak that goes up and then comes back down to 0, called the final. And that's a slide that he deserves a Nobel Prize for, just for that. And then there was also the video of this young cellist that made you cry. And so Robert has said he'll help, more or less. And so I kind of asked him 5 minutes ago, will you help me do this? Because you think more about education than I do. And so we're going to get, we have a big mailing list. We've got 600 people that have been here for these last 4 years, and all the speakers. And we're going to reach out to you somehow after he recovers from what I labeled here as my inappropriate ask. And that's good. So I want to finish with some sadness and then some humor, and I'll be done. And I got 2 minutes, so it'll work. So, I'm getting older, and this is actually nearly a complete list of the friends I have had who died in the last couple of years. It's a small list for a 71-year-old. I consider myself to be lucky to have a small list, or I've forgotten them already. I don't know. I just don't know, but I think it's a small list. And I feel really good about it. And in the program that for the first time, we dedicated, with Carissa and I thought hard about this, we dedicated this to Dana Swenson. And I wrote a little thing that I'm going to put up here and not read because I can't. I tried yesterday. I cannot. And the print might be big enough for you to read. It's a lot of words. The important thing, you don't have this in your program. We thought about putting it in the program, and it felt kind of, I don't know, it just felt wrong, and felt wrong to Steve, who's sitting here, and his kids, and their kids, and, just all bad. But if you read, the middle part says, if you're reading and listening, if you can multitask, said, hey, wait a minute. This was a screw-up. And so I think this was a screw-up. That's not so good. And the kids know that we think this, and I'm sorry to say this with them here, and with Dana's dad here also. This picture was taken when she was an actress. She was an actress, apparently a great actress. One of Utah's best. Sorry, it's a joke. It's just a small joke about Utah. Anybody from Utah, I'm sorry. But there's in the middle, it says, God, they could have done better. And then we ran into the medical system, and they didn't do so well either. And they didn't respond. They certainly didn't respond the way we hoped they would. And Dana was hoping they would save her. And so the last thing I can read, unnecessary suffering and lives shortened by errors in technology and judgment, they have to stop. So when we lose people because we've all had people die in car accidents and stuff like that, it seems unfair, and somehow we kind of say, that's okay, we can live with it, sort of we live with that. And it's just so much worse to lose people who didn't have to die, and I think that's really what this symposium is about, I think, okay? This is on a lighter note. This is my favorite picture of the Darwin Awards, and it's to remind you It's to remind you that 1.0 is generous, okay? Okay, that's it for me. I'm done. We're going to start. Thank you. I went a couple minutes over. I didn't mean to.